Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm Gwyneth Mallon. I'm the director of the NYU Center for the Humanities, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all here this evening. I want to thank our staff, Caroline Ossie and Denny Valentin, and our student assistants, Saraya Bunker and Janina Soriano, for their help with tonight's event. This evening is co-sponsored by the FAS Office of Educational Technology, the Tisch School of the Arts, and the NYU Libraries. So we have a very special evening for you this evening in which we're going to reveal to you everything you need to know about open educational resources. I was thinking actually, when I heard about this panel, we should have done this in September. But anyway, we're doing it now, and you can prepare for the coming, you can be way ahead for the following fall. To do so, we have with us a panel of distinguished professionals from different schools within NYU who are going to share with us their expertise in the area of OER. It has to have an acronym or it doesn't count. So it has an acronym, OER, free or low-cost teaching materials that can serve as an alternative to expensive textbooks. So I want to thank each of the panelists for joining us here this evening. I'm well aware of the fact that it is April, the cruelest month, and everyone is incredibly busy, so I'm very grateful to all of you for being here this evening. Dean of the Libraries, Carol Mendel, is going to moderate this evening's conversation, and I'm going to quickly introduce everybody with sort of brief bios and then turn the evening over to her. So for our panelists, Benjamin Stewart is the Expository Writing Program's Director of Faculty Development. He's a clinical associate professor, and he has a PhD from NYU's Department of Performance Studies and a master's degree from NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program. Daniel Schiffman works as an assistant arts professor at the Interactive Telecommunications program, ITP. You're going to hear that a lot tonight, I think. And he's also that's also at NYU Tisch School of the Arts. He's originally from Baltimore, and he received a BA in mathematics and philosophy from Yale and a master's degree from ITP. He works on developing tutorials, examples, and libraries for processing the open source programming language and environment created by Casey Reyes and Ben Fry. Mary Beth McCartan is Associate Curator in the Division of Libraries, specializing in information literacy in the digital age. Through reference, consultations, classroom instruction, and learning objects, she instructs students, faculty, and NYU community members in effective use of NYU library systems, collections, and services to advance their academic and research goals. Stephen Duncombe is the Professor of Media and Culture at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, and he's also in the Department of Media and Culture and Communications at Steinhardt. He is the author and editor of 6 books on the intersection of culture and politics, and is the creator of, as we see up here, Open Utopia, an open access, open source, web-based edition of Thomas More's Utopia. And we'll hear more about that this evening. And then our illustrious moderator, save best for last, Carol Mendel. She is the Dean of NYU's Division of Libraries, which includes NYU Libraries in New York, Abu Dhabi, and Shanghai, along with Campus Media Services, University Archives, and the NYU Press. Her work is focused on the transformation of infrastructures, services, and partnerships to serve the research library's core mission in a digital environment. We're very pleased to have all of you here this evening. I'm going to turn things over to Dean Mendel. Thank you.
Good evening. I'll be short because the good stuff is all there. And I do have to start with a disclaimer. I'm not sure that this panel is really going to be everything you ever wanted to know about OER. What I can tell you is that it's going to be some pretty interesting things about OER, and probably some things you never realized you wanted to know, but now you're glad you do. And so it's going to be, and then of course there's a question and answer period, so I guess in that sense, anything you wanted to know you can ask, and maybe there'll be an answer and maybe there won't. So this panel is going to be a combination of giving you some practical information. That's Mary Beth's role, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and then to give you some inspiration. So that the other 3 panelists have some pretty inspiring work. My only concern is I don't want their work to be intimidating. So that's why Mary Beth is here to tell you that you don't have to be as creative. We can help you find other stuff too. So it's OER is mix, match, make your own, use other people's. That's what we hope everyone will do. And I do want to spend just a minute on that context and give you, for me, 3 reasons why I think we all should care about open educational resources and why we should like them. And one is, of course, affordability. And that's getting a lot of press, and that's how I got into this business, actually. I'm chairing a group that's kind of coordinating ways of helping folks get at affordable course materials, and free is even better. And so the affordability initiative has gotten more people to pay attention. There are two other good reasons to look at open educational resources, but certainly choosing these instead of commercially produced, profit-driven textbooks is really something to think about when you're putting a course together. But the other reasons, it's not just about money, it's also about quality. And I think that when you start thinking about alternatives to textbooks, you actually start thinking more deeply about what it is you're teaching and how that relates to your own thinking and your own work. And I think often you end up with a lot better resources for students. And I think that's what you're going to see when you see the examples that the panel's going to be talking about. And then the third thing for me is sharing and all the benefits that go with that. And the word open is a real important word in OER. It's the first one, and because OER, they're open, they can be shared, they can be improved on, added to, expanded, changed, evolved, interactive every time they're used. And so I think you're going to hear a lot about the benefits of openness in just sharing your work in this panel too. So think about those things when you think about OER: affordability, quality, and all the benefits of sharing. I want to note that this panel is, and a lot of the work that we're doing on OER is being brought to you through the collaborative work of librarians, of instructional technologists, and teaching faculty. And I mention that because up here in front of you are a couple of librarians and 3 teaching faculty, but instructional technologists have had a lot to do with this too. And I really want to acknowledge the creator of this panel, Armanda Lewis, yes, the genius behind all of this is Armanda, and thank her very much. And she heads instructional technology for the FAS. So the panelists have been introduced to you. Mary Beth is going to be talking about the guide that the libraries, with help of others, have been working on creating to help. In theory, that guide should provide everything you ever wanted to know about open educational resources, and it's open, and we're looking for feedback on it. So the kinds of questions we get here will help us think about what else needs to be there. But our bottom line message is going to be, if you're confused about OER and you're thinking about maybe you want to find some, just please ask a librarian. We are here for you on that. Then if you want to get really brilliant and creative, you have some role models here, and it's going to be a treat to see what they are doing. So Mary Beth, you want to take? Oh, and we wanted to stay up here so we could hang out, but when people start showing slides, if heads are in your way, please wave at us and we'll go away. They have seats for us up there.
So I'm gonna talk about the guide in a little bit, but I'm gonna lead up to that guide first. And I guess in your effort to learn everything you need to know about OER, there's a few things that I can help you with from the library's perspective. My guess is that you've got certain main questions on your mind, namely these, I would think. And of these, what I feel like I can help you with most is about what exactly are open educational resources, to give you a little bit more about that. How do I find OER? Who will be available to me as a support as I venture into OER? And Carol already mentioned that librarians are going to be a great support to you. So let's talk about what are or is OER. So OER is teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license like Creative Commons that permits their free use and repurposing by others. So these can really run the gamut from full courses, modules, all the way to multimedia, to software. There's a lot of different objects that can be open educational resources. It's really essentially any tool, material, technique that is used to support the access to knowledge. The word free is an important word in OER, and it's important in two ways. It means kind of two things. One, it means that there's no cost to access the source itself. And then free also applies to the idea that it means that there's no charge for making use of the permissions that are associated with that source. To qualify as OER, there must always be a version of a resource that is freely available at no cost to the user. As far as permissions go, the degree of openness can really vary. If you think about when you say a door is open, it could be open a crack, it could be wide open. So what does it mean to be open? The degree has got to do with the permissions that are associated with the content. The permissions will let you know, do you need to attribute the source to the original creator when you use it? Can you revise the content? Can you mix it with other content to come up with a whole new resource? If you do that and you have a remixed resource, are you allowed to redistribute that? So these are the kinds of things that permissions will cover. Here's some OER content that was pulled together for a module on Nabokov. And what you've got here are a couple of lectures from Yale and Oxford. There's a book from the Internet Archive. There's a couple of images from Wikimedia Commons. So the repositories that make these items available, these resources available, and hold them are the ones that are going to provide the information about the permissions. So for instance, the lecture from Yale, this is something that resides in the Merlot repository. It's a particular repository of OER. And within Merlot, it will let you know what your permissions are to use this particular item. And in this case, it's a Creative Commons license, and this work is licensed under the specific thing of attribution, non-commercial, no derivative. So basically what that means is that you are free to share this, to copy, redistribute it in any material, the material in any medium or format, as long as you follow these terms. You must give it attribution. You must indicate if you made any changes to it. You can't use it for commercial purposes. There are no derivatives that are allowed. So that means that you can't, change it, mix it, and make something else, and then distribute it out there. And this is an example of a lot of can'ts, but like a lot of OER, that's the idea, that it's open. But you do have to check, the permissions that are associated with it. So this brings us to the question of how do you find OER? There are a lot of repositories out there that aggregate and share and promote open content, and these are just some of them here: Merlot, OER Commons, the Digital Public Library of America. There's also textbooks initiatives, so these are focused on textbooks and making them open and affordable. And there's a few, one from Rice, OpenStack, one from the University of Minnesota. So these are some of the repositories out there. Our librarians have created a curated list of OER repositories and textbook initiatives. And this is the guide that Carol referred to there. This is just a facsimile here of the guide, but they are listed in this guide along with descriptions of kind of the disciplines that each one of these repositories might be strong in, and some of the content that you might find in there. So you will find information here, the curated list. You'll find links so that you can get right to the resources. This guide also includes a section on library resources for course content. So library resources are also a very important part of the affordability picture. The library pays for licensed content on behalf of the entire NYU community. So we have licenses to e-books and e-journals, digital audio and video, images, data, lots and lots more stuff. This is costly on the one hand, but not for students, in the end, because they're not, are not required to pay for these. These are mostly copyright restricted material. So in that case, you can't just make as many copies as you want and just distribute them all over. You can't alter the content. It's different than open educational resources, but you can certainly use the resource and provide a link in your NYU classes LMS directly to a resource that you want a student to use. So that's how you can use our library resources. Librarian involvement in OER awareness on campuses is certainly not, unique to NYU. Librarians at institutions nationwide are providing guides like these, very similar to these for their faculty and administration. Librarians commonly support other types of OER as well, or they have other sorts of supports for OER. The Association for Research Libraries, or ARL, is an organization of major research institution libraries like Columbia, NYU, Harvard, Yale, 120 others. In 2016, ARL surveyed their members' libraries to find out what they're doing to support OER. So basically, these are the things that they responded by saying that they provide help in searching and finding. They provide reserve software and services so that library materials can be put on reserve so that students won't have to necessarily purchase a copy for themselves. They provide copyright consultation and open licensing consultation, just educating users about affordable content, and providing local repositories where you can put the content that you create. Tangible support for OER is really important to address the barriers that faculty are finding in trying to use OER. The results of a 2015 survey of about 3,000 faculty in the US about attitudes toward the adoption of OER were published in this resource, Opening the Textbook, Educational Resources in U.S. Higher Education. And basically, the faculty said these were the types of barriers that they saw. Some of the top ones. There just aren't enough resources in my subject. There's no comprehensive catalog of OER, so it's really hard to find things. They also said, there's not a high quality stuff that I'm finding. So those are the kinds of things that they found to be barriers. We in the library, along with the educational technologists, are here to help you when you're facing some of those barriers, or even before that. We are providing the kinds of supports that we saw when we looked at the results of the ARL study. the very same kinds of things are things that we're doing here. We're helping you search and find OER, educating our users, providing all kinds of services like copyright consultation, local repositories. We've got both like disciplinary and functional experts in the library that can, help with this. We've got 35 subject-specific librarians, and we've got the digital scholarship services librarians like April Hathcock, who is the scholarly communications librarian, is a real expert on, is probably the most expert person in the library about OER, and certainly about copyright and intellectual property and those kinds of things. So I think one of the really great things, Carol had mentioned that committee that she chairs that has a combination of librarians and instructional technologists and the bookstore coming together to talk about OER and how we can support it on campus and affordable content. And it's a great thing because we have gotten to know, librarians and instructional technologists have gotten to know each other, and we had a workshop recently where we came together to really talk about how we could, team up to even provide stronger support for our faculty as they venture into OER and as they, come up against barriers. So with that, we'll be talking about some of the OER that's happening. And this is our guide. It's very simple, guides.nyu.edu, OER. Yeah, and we have cards here that you can take on your way out. It's got it on there. And visit the guide. Let us know if it's helpful. Let us know what other things that we can cover in the guide to help you. Contacts to librarians. It's all in there. Okay? Thank you.
Hello. What I want to do today is, I'm not an expert, by the way, on open educational resources. In fact, I didn't even know that was a term until I was asked to be on this panel. But I am an expert in teaching, and it's what I've done for about 25 years. And I'm fascinated with the idea of how does one spread knowledge, how does one spread ideas, which I think is really at the heart of this idea of open educational resources. So what I want to do is share with you a couple of projects that I've done, which I guess fall under this rubric, what I did and what I learned. And I'm going to start with my Open Utopia project. And this was really an experiment in opening up a very old textbook, which was Thomas More's Utopia. And it started in a teaching experience, oddly enough, not at NYU, but at Moscow State University, where I was giving Fulbright seminars on political imagination. And I got very interested in the text of Utopia, insofar as that Thomas More, using the very primitive technology he had at his disposal in 1516, that is the book, was trying to create a document which would stimulate other people's imaginations. And I thought to myself, well, this is really interesting, but I'm living in the 21st century, and I have access to technology which can do things that Thomas More never could. And so I came home and created this thing called Open Utopia, and I'm just going to take you through some of its features. The first thing to notice is that it's Creative Commons licensed. Everything on it is Creative Commons, and it's a by SA license, which means you have to credit it, but you can share it. It's actually not an NC license because I wanted people to be able to use it in any form they wanted. And I figure since the basic premise of Thomas More's is the idea that it's common property, who was I to even restrict it to that? Then we basically have your editor's preface. But here's where it gets really interesting. The first thing I did was did create an open source edition of Thomas More's Utopia, which is not that hard to do because it was printed in 1516. So it's long since gone out of copyright. What is a little bit harder is that a lot of the translations of the letters and other sort of ephemera before and after it actually are under copyright. And so what I did is I went back to editions, around scholarly editions in the 1840s, and were able to find enough that had enough of a modern translation to be useful, yet also were out of copyright. There were some things that were not out of copyright, so I hired a classic scholar to translate, and then under the condition that it would be a Creative Commons license. So if you go over to the right, it essentially has the entire contents of Thomas More's Utopia, and in various forms, standard PDF, simple text file, open document format, and EPUB. You know, it's not in Microsoft Word, which is a proprietary software. All of this was created on open source software, and it was also, very importantly, created by me. This is a WordPress platform. I am not a programmer. I am not like these folks over here who actually are quite sophisticated at what they do. This was something I was able to teach myself. WordPress is actually an incredibly robust, free, open source platform, and I was able to use it to create this, and then I had a designer help me with some of the design elements. But I also wanted to think about, well, what could I do that Thomas More could not do? And so one of the things I was really interested in is opening up Utopia to become a repository for images, including many of the classical images. But as you go on, and I think I can go down here, there we go, you get sort of, this is one of my favorites, there's a 1969 Man from Utopia, incredibly psychedelic comic book. And let's see if I get out of here. And I also opened it up to the public to suggest different images that I could add to this archive. I also, there's a video archive attached to it. I won't play the videos, but they're utopian-themed videos. And finally, what there was I hired some of my friends to read Utopia. And so I wanted to put it into a form of a ebook, or a audiobook, yeah. So let's see if we can. It was working before. There.
Greetings. I am almost ashamed, right well-beloved Peter Giles, to send you this book of the Utopian Commonwealth, well nigh after a year's space, which I am sure you looked for within a month and a half.
So if you ever have a long drive, you can just download it all. But this is probably the part I'm most interested in, which is the idea of Thomas More's Utopia, in many ways, was this idea of creating a text which was not a text, or creating a utopia which was no place, quite literally utopia, and creating a text which collapsed in on itself, insofar as he continuously reminds us that this world that he's drawn us into doesn't exist, you can't be there, yet you've left your own sort of safety. And so therefore you're sort of left in a creative space to imagine by yourself. But it is by yourself, because in the end you're reading a book. And so I thought about, well, what could I do to sort of socialize Thomas More's Utopia? And the first thing I did was also use actually I can go straight, yeah, open platform, which is the Wikipedia platform. And what I did is I made Utopia, or at least fragments of it, open to editing. And so these are little stubs, and what people do is they log on and they edit it, and including new things like postmodern utopia, or one of my favorites down here is Nightly Day. The people of Utopia adore the actress Keira Knightley. One of the things about opening up your text is you can't control them, and you have to kind of go where people want to take it. But I kind of like that. And I also created a capacity to create your own utopia. And so, for example, there's students in my school created Galatopia. And what they did is they wrote a utopia. And it is open to editing as well. Then, in collaboration with the Institute for the Future of the Book, I created, let's see if, a social text, or a social version of Utopia. And what that means essentially is that a community, and there is, it can be a small community of a book club, or the generalized community of everybody who's commented on Utopia, writes marginalia into Utopia. Part of Utopia the text originally was marginalia, and you can see it to the right here. And it's been theorized that it was written by his friend Peter Giles, who shows up as a character in the book, but was also a real friend of Thomas More. I have a theory that Peter Giles was drinking when he did this, because they start out very sober, and then they get really, really wacky and wild, and then they stop for a while. And then they start out sober again, and they get really, really wacky and wild, and then start again. So I think there's an unfounded theory, okay? But that over a series of days, or nights rather, Thomas Giles added these marginalia. But I thought this is a great way that other people could add marginalia. And so it's quite simple, actually. What you do is you highlight, and then pops up. You can add a note, you can underline, and if you add a note, if I type something in here, and hit Save Draft and Post, it would show up for the entire community. At this point, there's 2,519 different posts at that point. And what's fascinating about this, and I'm going to talk about this later, is that for a while, there was none, except for me and my friends, drinking, usually. And then a friend of mine said, have you gone on Open Utopia's social book lately? And I said, no. I hadn't gone on in a couple of weeks, and I went on, and there was 600, and then 800, and then 1,000. And what was happening was, as different teachers would assign it for different classes, you would get this sort of flurry of activity. And what was really wonderful is that then they would see what other students in other high schools or other universities were writing. Some of the comments are really silly, some are erudite, but it's a whole range, and you get this sense that you're reading this with a whole bunch of other folks. So that is what I tried to do in opening up an old book and making it accessible, not just accessible in terms of who can read it, but accessible in the idea of breaking the text apart so other people can contribute to it. For my next project, which is Actopedia, which is also on an open source platform, this is Drupal, I had another problem, which was my field, more or less, is culture and politics. And I'm particularly interested as both a scholar, but also as a practitioner in the merging of arts and activism. Now this is a new field, and it's a constantly transforming field, and so the books have not been written, or they constantly go out of date. And so working with my center, which is Center for Artistic Activism, but also the Yes Lab when it was here at NYU, what we decided to do is create a user-generated database of case studies of artistic activism. And they're broken down by issue, by medium, and by region. And at this point, for example, I'll go to Latin America and the Caribbean, you'll see, if we go down, there's probably about 500, 400, about 120 examples from Latin America. Altogether, there's about 2,000 examples. And what's wonderful is I have to check it every day to make sure nobody spammed it. And so every couple of days, a new one pops up. And so this is a constantly expanding open educational resource. And it takes a little bit of cultivation, which I want to get back to. But what I love about it is it becomes a place in which a field, you can actually see a field being expanded, growing, being defined as we speak. I think I learned two things. Yeah, two things in doing all these projects. Three things, actually. One is, there's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine, okay? What I mean by that is, there's this idea that if you come up with an app, that it will automatically generate content, a community, and people will start using it. My experience is that's just not true. I'd say 75% of all content in here comes from this being assigned as a class assignment. And a class assignment happening in, a brick and mortar institution. And so no matter what we can say about these sort of digital projects, the genesis for most of this content and why it's useful is as an addendum to actually an old-fashioned classroom. So that's the first thing I learned. The second thing is, and this is frustrating to anybody who works with sort of digital projects that are constantly expanding, is that unlike a book in which you're done, you put it on a shelf, you get it 3 years later, and it's still the same old book, right? All of these take constant maintenance. One, you always have to police them for spam, and you always have to be coming up with new security. But the second thing is they just sometimes don't work, and they sometimes break. And one of the things, since people assembled in the room have much more power than I do, I would like to put out a pitch for NYU is really good at helping us set these things up. They're not as good in supporting the maintenance. And we need to wrap our heads around the fact that this sort of work needs maintenance. And so I don't want to take you into Open Utopia. If we got behind the curtains, you would see a white screen of death, which I've talked to Jenny about, which is what happens when your modules go out of date. And I just haven't had the 5 hours to open it up and try to figure out which module is doing that. But this happens continuously, and I always have to keep these up to date. The final thing, and I'll leave you with this, is the lesson I learned is that these things often fail. This is something I created for a class called How Art Works, and it was built on a Tumblr platform, and it was designed by the students, and it just never worked. It failed. It was frustrating. The students were frustrated. And part of this process is being comfortable with failure. For everything that works, and we can show the very impressive things that do, there's also things which just don't. And this is an example of that. I'll leave you there.
Hello. Okay, let me get set up here. My name is Dan Schiffman. I'm also going to talk about a few different less organized and nicely polished projects. Oh, this is like advancing automatically. That I've worked on. I'm starting with this just, I teach at ITP, which is such a place about people and community, and it's something that I feel like whenever I talk about the work that I need to do, I need to at least say, just to remind myself at the beginning, because really most of my time and research is really spent with computer code and programming. And often we think of these things as very disconnected, but a lot of the projects that I'm working on related to open educational resources are really trying to keep the human being in the technology. So. Something that for one thing, I've been spending a lot of, probably the last 10 years working on open source projects, which I'm now realizing, like, oh, open source, that's open educational resource. That's an open educational resource. It's really the same thing, open source software development. And part of my mission in research is about teaching people not just to learn to use software, but to create their own software. So what does it mean if you need to accomplish a goal, if you have an idea that you want to realize, instead of downloading and finding somebody else's or paying for buying some software, how can you make your own software to perform that? So the main organization that I work with on this type of idea is something called the Processing Foundation, which and we develop and maintain a set of open source programming languages and environments for students to learn programming with. And we have run a lot of other initiatives and community projects and that sort of thing. But the main mission is to teach programming. And the main mission of processing is to get away. So if I said, OK, let's all now forget about this open educational resource and have a programming lesson, and this is what I showed you, most of you would want to leave the room. But processing is all about simplifying, making things friendly, making things accessible. And in addition to just the code aspect of that, it's how do we present material and educational resources that are free and open, just like the software is in the same way. Most of this is done through a website called GitHub, which is built on top of a piece of software called Git. There's a lot of technical information about this that I would love to just spend hours talking about. By the way, I have a video tutorial series about GitHub, which I'll point out later. Just about everything that I'm talking about, I probably have a video tutorial series about. I'm like plugging this stuff unnecessarily. But so this is a primary place. What GitHub is a place for software developers to collaborate, to write messages to each other, to work on projects together to develop software projects. And so a lot of the themes in open source on GitHub I find end up with me in other types of publishing that I do, whether it's written material or video tutorials. And so the main first project that I want to talk about is something called the Magic Book Project. And there's actually been several different variations of this project. And there's a current new incarnation of it. This is by Rune Madsen, who is a researcher at ITP. I'm not the creator of Magic Book. I'm the beneficiary of Magic Book, and I've used it for some publishing projects that I'm going to get into. So I have this textbook that that's about 10 years old. It is like a traditional textbook. you can hold it in your hand, you can flip the pages, it has information in it. And I just naively, at some point, some publisher came to me and said, hey, would you like to put this material in a textbook? And I said, sure, why not? And then I discovered that the process for writing a textbook was incredibly medieval. In the sense that I had these word processing documents, and I would kind of like format it in some arbitrary way, and then there would be a designer who would mock up and style everything as a particular design. Then the publisher would try to take my content, merge it with the design. They FedExed it to me, and I had to write stuff on it and then FedEx it back. It was this sort of like insane, I couldn't believe the process. And then what happened to me, and then it also was very expensive. So this I grabbed, I can't see, but the ebook, first of all, is $50, which I think is a pretty insane price, in my opinion, for the book. And the print book, is like $50. It's expensive, and I do earn some royalties when it's sold, but not very much. And anytime I want to do anything with the content, I have to ask permission, and I can't figure out who to talk to because a different person has left. So what the Magic Book, as a kind of project and as a theme, sought out to do was kind of facilitate self-publishing in a more flexible way. And I mean flexible in terms of formats of how you can distribute your work, how you can economically either sell it or give it away for free. And so one of the main things that happens with me in particular is processing as an open source platform. I want to take stuff that's in a textbook and put it on the processing website. And not only do I have to ask permission, but I also have to then basically rewrite the whole thing because I got to change the format to make it web friendly. So the way the Magic Book works is, this is a bit of a technical description, but the idea of the Magic Book was if we could just write the content in one document and press a magic button, which is why we call it the Magic Book. If you imagine a giant button right here, I could just press it, and then suddenly I would have a PDF that I could email, I could have a PDF that I could print, I could have an EPUB version, I could have a Mobi version, and I could have a web version. And that's what I did with a second book, and I think it might actually be more useful if I just go to the website for this book. I'm going to switch down here first. So this is a second level programming textbook. It's called The Nature of Code, and this is the entire book online. So first of all, I'll also mention this is I released it with a Creative Commons Attribution, non-commercial, same license I think. Mostly the only thing that I cared about is I didn't want somebody else to be able to take the content and resell it. So I was very happy for anybody to take the content and remix it, reuse it, but not sell it. That was something that, I was giving it away for free, but if it was to, but the print version is sold, that was something I was reserving for myself. The other thing that's exciting about, for me about this, I'm going to click on a random chapter and hope this works, is that a lot of the content in the book is diagrams and is about programming simulations. So if I come down here, you can see the actual, while in the print version of the book, there's just a static screenshot, but here in the web version of the book, this can actually be animated, and you can sort of see the results of your code. Now, I never got to the second step, which was then you could edit the code, and it would update here, which I have other projects and have this sort of element to, and it's certainly possible, but it's just not something that I was able to make happen with this particular project. So, but to me, really the key thing is, even though there is also, if I go back to the homepage here, and I click here just to, Amazon, let's see what this comes up with. There is an actual print version. I was going to try to do look inside so you can see what it looks like. Oh, this will do it. You can see there is a print version that looks just like a print book, but I didn't have to write two versions of it. The same source document is able to generate both of these. And the reason why this is so important for me and the kind of work that I do is, there's a zillion bugs that are in the book, mistakes that I have to fix. The technology changes, a new programming language comes out, I have to keep it up to date. And so the ability to not have this sort of finished thing, it's sometimes frustrating, finished thing sitting on a shelf is kind of a key aspect of this process. The other thing I'll just mention, economics of this, I was really interested in experimenting with different ways of deriving income from the project. So I also offer a DRM-free ebook bundle. So if you wanted to download a PDF, EPUB, and Kindle version of the book, You can do it right here, and I don't know how well you can see this, but you can, if you wanted to, you could slide this all the way up to $50. I don't know that anybody's ever done that. Or you can slide it down to $0. So it's sort of, I have this kind of name your price, and I also processing the open source software project that I work on is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. So what I also do is donate. I allow anyone to slide and determine how much they want to donate to processing. So they can. So this is inspired by something called the Humble Bundle, which is a system for selling music and other types of digital content and donating to charity. So I kind of copied their model of having these sliders. So what I find is that even though I would say maybe only 1 out of 10 people who download the book pay for it, a lot of people who I think might have otherwise pirated it do pay for it just by the goodwill of having it available for free. I also get, once a month an email from, I'm a high school student in Philippines, and I don't have any credit card, and I'm just so thank you. You let me when I graduate from college, I'm gonna pay for it or something, So, but that to me is like so much nicer than the $5 in so many ways. So it's a really enjoyable experience. If I loved having, with a publisher, I get 2 statements a year, and I can barely figure out who's reading the book. With this, if I wanted to, I could actually have it like notify my phone every time somebody. I don't do that, but every time somebody downloads it, or with how much they paid for it, and that sort of thing. So the e-commerce system is something that I custom developed. It's not part of the Magic Book publishing platform, but it's certainly something that you can layer together. Let me see. What else I have here for you. So, I wanted to also mention, I thought I would show Rune's book. So Rune, who, I'm just going to go to his website as well. He's creating a book through Magic Book called Programming Design Systems. He also has, one of the nice things about the way that he's publishing it is the book's not finished. So he's publishing it as he goes. So every week or every month, if Rune were here, he would say like, no, every 2 months probably. But he's publishing a new chapter. And you can subscribe to a newsletter where he sends out updates, and you can send him feedback, that sort of thing. And so you can see here, I'll just show you, this is about programming for graphic design. And I think, let's go to the color one. You can see Rune is an amazing designer, and you can see there are various interactive demos as well within the content. Now he, at the present, is only publishing this content on the web and only making it available for free. So there's the Magic Book platform just allows you to author the content with a particular type of syntax markup it's really just a text document, but there's a certain way you type the content in, and then through the system it will publish to these various platforms. You need to know a little bit about how to, it uses web programming and how it styles and does all the layout, but one of the things we're hoping to do with Magic Book is offer a set of templates. So much like if you use WordPress, you don't need to know how to do the design yourself. You can pick from some templates and adjust it. That's something we're hoping that will happen with the Magic Book. Both of us write technical content, and so that's what these 2 examples are, but one thing I'm really curious about is what happens if a poet uses this, or some writing fiction, or a historical textbook. What are other types of content? So if anybody's interested, let me know, get in touch, and we can sort of talk about that. I know I probably 2 minutes left. So the last thing that I want to talk about, I've also been making a lot of video tutorials. These were actually shot in my office in the Tisch building. I had just some crazy setup of some cameras and recorded. So this is something I've been doing as well over the years, and recently, with the help of Rob Dietz, who's here, instructional technologist, and other folks at ITP, we set up a new recording studio in the Tisch building on the 9th floor. This is a little bit of a diagram of it. It's kind of an elaborate setup, which I don't think you need just to make videos. All you need is your laptop and your web camera. I've kind of gone off the deep end a little bit. But this studio is something we're also hoping to open source. And it has the thing that's special in it. It has a green screen, so here you can see I would stand behind this desk with content on my laptop would then appear behind me in the video.
So just to say,
yeah.
we have
And yes,
the
yes.
digital that's open.
Right, and there are other facilities. So this part of this was done, with inspiration from the digital studio that's at Bobst. And there, I know that the LaGuardia Co-op has some studio facilities, and I just saw another one in Brooklyn that I was wandering by a room, and I was like, there's a green wall in there. So, so there's a lot of facilities like this at NYU. This is an overhead shot. What I started doing, which is me going off the deep end a little bit, is publishing this stuff to YouTube. And one of the things that's become really exciting and interesting for me there is to discover that there is a wide audience. So I really make these videos for my students at ITP, and then I was kind of putting them on the internet anyway, and then I've recently discovered this wider audience. And one of the things that I've also done is started streaming them live. So one of the capabilities of this studio is able to broadcast live, and I've been doing experiments with having a live chat and people asking questions. It's very awkward, but it's been an interesting learning experience to figure out how to make that work. The thing I guess I'll leave you with, the last thing I want to say is, certainly in the realm of tech and programming, if you look on YouTube and you search computer programming tutorials, you're going to find a lot of white guys with beards, basically, is the easiest way to describe it. And so one of the things I've been really excited about doing and is making this studio accessible to other people, to be able to get their voices heard, get their content online, to feel like this isn't such a scary thing that there's no way I could do this. So I've started mostly doing this with kind of friends and colleagues in the open source community. This is a list of some guest tutorials that I have, and I hope to be able to help facilitate that with the larger NYU community as well. So if people are interested in trying to make a video tutorial, even if it has nothing to do with computer programming whatsoever. It doesn't have to be a tutorial, just a video about something. Let me know, and I can help facilitate that either in the studio at Tisch or in some of the other places that are at NYU as well. Okay, thanks very much.
All right. So this is a short history of the Tisch textbook that we've used for the expository writing program, which is the first year class that all the Tisch students have to take for their core writing requirement. Thanks to Mary Beth, I've realized that my title is a bit of a lie, in that I'm less talking about open access resources and more talking about licensed content that can then be free to the student. So this was the textbook that we used to, that was required for our students. It used to be a lot bigger. It used to cost about $90. So about 10 years ago, we started looking for ways to reduce that cost. And so this is published by McGraw-Hill. So every year we would look at the licensing fees they were paying for essays that are included in this. And then we would look for the ones that were most expensive and try to weed them out and try to see if we could find online versions of those. So around 2007, 2008, we started developing an e-reader supplement to this physical book. And so initially that was a Microsoft Word document that we shared with the faculty. And then it became this Google document. One of the nice things about the Google Doc is we could have a short guide to using libraries. And there's a sheet that's been handed out that one side of it has the current version of that. You can just, if you want to look through that, that has the kinds of things we're trying to introduce our students to as they would land on this page. So, actually, let me go back to that. Some of what the content on that Google document, so some of the content on that Google document is open resources that are open. Some of it then is stuff behind firewalls. And one of the principles we tried to embed in this document was both to give links, but then also to give a kind of protocol to the student in case the link is broken so that they can find their way into getting that document on their own. And we can look, I've got a couple of examples here. let's see. So this is what an entry might look like. To William Cronin's Trouble with Wilderness essay, we've got the stable link, and then we've got a series of steps that the student can follow if they have trouble with that link or if they're off campus. A link that's really useful for students is this Get It link that should be coming up. So this link, if you can find ways of getting it written into students' brains, it's a really useful link for finding any journal that NYU has access to. They can basically go to that journal field, and this page will tell them if NYU has free access to it. And so as that e-reader developed, with the affordability initiatives, we decided to see if we could go completely electronic. And this year, that's what we've done as a pilot within Tisch. So my colleague Elizabeth Meixel has been a big part of developing this site, and Deanna Sessions has been indispensable as well. So we've basically been able to put this whole book on an NYU WordPress site. So we've got that, the library resources information on that sheet I've given you here. We've got links to the Writing Center. We've got links to the Moses Center. We've got a summary of the course. And then here we have all the readings for students to access. The library has also been indispensable for helping us to get access to content that without their licensing these, only one person would have access to at a time. So in Tisch, we have about 800 students. The library, April Hathcock, has been really helpful in getting this content licensed so that all of the freshman class can access this when they need to, so they can download a whole book. The permissions for this kind of book are really expensive to go into this sort of thing. So that has given a lot of access in ways that we didn't have before. One of the problems that has emerged, though, is that writing teachers like to have their students print things. And so what has emerged is a kind of divide between students who do print things and students who don't print things. And so, in fact, it's created some problems. And I think what we're going to go to next year is something between this kind of fancy production and the electronic, where we're going to try to work with the bookstore to make a course pack that's a little cheaper than this, since we want them writing on it anyway. This pilot has actually clarified for us that we don't need this fancy thing, but we do, for right now at least, teachers do want the physical copies. And that may be to some degree a function of teachers not feeling comfortable with using the electronic commenting software. We've had people experimenting with that, but ultimately most of our teachers have felt unsatisfied with that kind of electronic commenting, and they really want the students to have a physical object. So that's just a short history of the process we've gone through and what we've come to. I'm sure will continue to evolve. It's evolved almost every year in some form or another. But right now we're looking at that middle space between the all electronic and this fancy production, which ends up costing too much. Thanks.
Try again.
Yep. Okay. So the programming things that you were working on look very creative. What I'm wondering is, does NYU work with other universities so that people can create things together across university lines?
Well, from my standpoint, it's a good question. The open source projects that I work on tend to have a lot of contributors. Some of them are from industry, some of them are, artists, and many of them are also at other universities. So those types of collaborations certainly happen informally just through those types of connections.
Actually, my question was kind of similar also just to ask about the potential for collaboration on the particular project you showed with the Magic Book Project. I was just thinking that there would be quite a possibility for multi-authors. You mentioned the other author who's kind of releasing it on a monthly basis, so there might be options for kind of new ways of doing peer review and different kind of things like that. So I was just wondering about kind of that aspect of it.
Yeah, so I shouldn't speak too much for Rune, but Rune, before working on this Magic Book project, worked for O'Reilly, which is a large technical publishing company, amongst many other things. And so he has a lot of experience in working on various tools for those kinds of collaborations. So, and what we've often talked about, in the same way that when we work on a piece of software collaboratively, people are in different locations, they share the source code back and forth, they write messages to each other, they annotate each other's. This is a very sort of tried and true process in open source software development. We're trying to bring some of those aspects also to authoring just text. And it works beautifully in a technical sense. I think the challenge is making the sort of ease of use. So currently the Magic Book is kind of easy to use in the sense that it just does, you sort of type the stuff in, you press a couple buttons and it kind of runs, but we haven't made it so user-facing friendly in that if you didn't know a few technical things, you got to download this and you have to type in this command. So it still requires right now like a little bit of a lesson, so to speak, or somebody to help you through it. The goal is to be much more self-explanatory. And then once we have something like that, I think a next step would certainly be to start to think about more collaborative social features. So right now it doesn't have those features, but I think that's such an important and great idea.
Steve, you want to comment on that? Because your work is, you're attracting interaction and collaboration. Does it feel like collaboration, or is it just more of a place to gather?
Is it collab? I think of my role, maybe this is very similar, as a facilitator. And so what I'm doing is sort of, it's like a potluck. I kind of open up a space, and then I kind of say, okay, I don't want salad. Too many people bring salad, and I hate beans or something like that. But other than that, come on in and see what you got. And then invariably someone does bring beans, and I have to censor them or something of that nature. But that it's not so much of a collaboration. I have done collaborative projects, but and in fact, actually creating these projects was a collaborative thing. But it's more, I see my role as a facilitator, creating a community leader.
And to add one thing that I'm realizing with the question, I was kind of thinking solely about the collaboration between maybe multiple authors on a document. But there is something that happens, and I know this is happening for Rune, is that if you publish something over time and you have a kind of user base of readers, you start getting feedback from them. And so, and I actually did the same thing with Nature of Codebook. I actually did it originally through a Kickstarter, which is a kind of crowdfunding platform. And I had people who signed up for that, got kind of advanced versions. And there's all this stuff about like physics. I sort of knew the code stuff, but didn't really know the physics stuff. And I would get these long emails correcting all of the scientific stuff that I had just said. So it was almost like I had free technical editing from the community during that process. So I think having that public, not only the sort of public and free open finished product, but the sort of open thing that the thing open in development can really bring in a lot of voices to a project in interesting ways.
I want to ask a question of Ben on this collaboration theme, because I see, yes, we're supposed to be 4 inches from the microphone, so, and because it's interesting that folks are not yet comfortable with online annotation, you know. Well, I certainly would rather pick up my pen, but I'm old, you know, so, a lot of teachers, or in my world, when people like to talk about these kinds of projects, talk about the joy of watching students be able to comment on each other's work and engage and exchange. So, you know, how did that all go when you decided?
I think a big part of the issue there is maybe we don't yet have the tools that are right for a writing classroom type of commenting.
Just not easy
One
enough?
one of the things that the people who have delved furthest into this have noticed is that the tools that are out there, the commenting just became saturated too quickly, and you couldn't differentiate one person from another. It got saturated so fast. So what she ended up doing was just going into Google Docs and, you know, pasting the text into Google Docs, and she felt like she could manage the process a lot more easily from there. I mean, the Google apps do often become like a default, this will work, and but I do think there's an opportunity there maybe for some kind of app that would create a structure that would work more for a writing class. Something to think about for sure.
Interesting. Questions? There's a hand there.
Hi, congratulations for the panel, great panel. So we have open source project, we have textbooks, we have open resources, but what about open courses? And I don't mean just MOOCs, but courses that we can use and we can remix. Why universities are so afraid of sharing all this knowledge through courses? Any thoughts about that?
They're afraid of going out of business. And that is something, I mean, why I'm allowed to put Creative Commons on everything I produce, not only for these, but also for all the work I do at the Center for Artistic Activism, is because I'm a university professor who draws a salary and has healthcare benefits. And I mean, I think that is part of the problem of this, which is free, as in free beer is very good, and free data, but in the end, there isn't an economic model except the subsidy model. And so unless we have a state subsidy or a university subsidy or something of that nature, we have to think about who's actually going to pay for the book, who's going to pay for the author's time, who's going to pay for the instructor who's standing up there. However, because we do have salaries, I think we could be encouraged to experiment more with that. Because I think that, and we can figure out an economics model that might work, and I hope we can.
Mary Beth, do any of the OpenStax sources have courses as well as textbooks?
Yeah, there's definitely ones out there that have full courses. I'm thinking MIT is a big one. And I mean, there's Khan Academy and some of the other ones as well. But there's a few schools who have decided that they were going to put their efforts here, and apparently, like with MIT, all of the materials are available online. The lectures, the full courses, everything.
To use as you wish.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you can remix or whatever, but they're, I haven't really looked into that, but they're there, is what they say. So
It does go back to the economics, because MIT has an endowment that sustains this. And that's the other thing. You brought up the point of maintenance, because not only does the institution free you to do this work, this is your intellectual work, it's part of your world and your job, but how much infrastructure and staffing can the institution invest in that sustainability? And we're struggling with that in the library all the time. And where do we draw the line? And we're changing the line all the time. We're changing the services all the time. But it is a complex problem. Everything that we're talking about doesn't just happen by magic. It's free, but it's not free. Dan?
Well, just to speak to that, Schiffman's lectures are all online, as are his syllabi. So, except for sitting in the classroom, it's all sitting there, and so it's all flipped. More people are applying as a result of him doing this. So, I'm not sure that'll be true in all places, but it's just been better. And also, I teach classes using his videos. I'm a little shy about making my own videos, so I just remix his. And, like I'll teach a class in the dance department that's a similar class to his, and I'll just rearrange the order of some of them, which is, being on your committee, that was a thing from OER that I really took from it, is so often the creation of it is in this modular way, and there's a big win with remixing that you're talking about. And like, Ben, your book, I'm sure some of those authors prefer, some of your section, how many sections of that do you teach? Like,
It's about 62 sections a semester.
yeah, so, it would help the creativity of the professor to not be locked into certain essays or other, to be able to. But when I do use your videos, sometimes I notice there's a 3-second thing where you got to watch an ad on some of them. So I assume you're getting a few cents from that.
Yes.
Does that add up to textbook kind of money for a professor?
Well, I don't know what textbook money really adds up to, but I can speak for my own.
You've done
but yes.
you've done the regular publishing, you've done the self-publishing, and now
So
you've done the online videos.
I would say for me, in terms of the thing that that has worked the best economically, is doing the self-publishing. So text. So the video stuff does generate income, a very small amount if you turn that on YouTube. But the size of my audience currently is such that it's not a tremendous. It's not something that anybody could sustain themselves on, equivalent to like a salary teaching at a university. But okay, a book. Yeah, for me currently, it's probably like half or a quarter of what a book royalties would be for the year, the video stuff. But I do personally, I think of them in a similar ways, like in the same way that I might work on a book, and that's the content that I publish, and I might want to make it available for free in this format, but for pay in this format. I think of the video content as no different. I mean, it's very different in many ways in terms of the form and how people consume it. But I think of that as publishing course material similarly to if I put an online tutorial on a blog, a video tutorial on YouTube, or a PDF that somebody can download online. So for me, all of those things are. I'm not as interested in this like full prescribed course that you kind of sign up for, rather than more this sort of modular, like pick and choose and grab the stuff.
So that you've done all three, and I can't exactly see your thing or remember, but so you've kind of started with that traditional publishing model, and now you're doing videos, you're a little bit more established. I wonder, how can we encourage maybe faculty without tenure or without that status level? They're not really going to be the ones that feel comfortable making those resources, but maybe they're the ones that kind of need to be making their resources because their content isn't there. So how can we encourage our faculty when they don't feel as comfortable?
Having been here a very long time and been on many promotion and tenure committees, it has to start there at some level. It has to be, I can't tell you how many promotion and tenure committees where we say, oh, that's very nice, where's the published monograph? And there's a lot of lip service to this idea of making work available, doing digital platforms and so on. But it has to be a culture change at the university level when it comes to things like promotion and hiring. And I don't know how that's going to happen. Because of the structure of the university, which is not necessarily a top-down structure. We have to do sort of educational work amongst our colleagues, saying that this is actually the future of the university.
One thing that is important, I think, in this area as well is making it really easy to make the videos, because it can, sometimes I hear like, oh, Coursera made this course and they produced these videos and their budget was $750,000. I'm like, well, what? What would they spend the money? I don't know if that's a real number. But so one of the things that I've tried to do is just have very simple systems where you can kind of just press a button, you record, you can then upload it. You don't need to do post-production, you don't need to have a professional crew. And so, there's a spectrum there as well, from just opening up, doing a screen capture and talking over it. But I guess for me, it takes like a little bit of practice, even especially like doing the thing where you're in a room by yourself talking to like a camera. It's like a really awkward, strange thing. And so I think having more mechanisms for people to feel like they can just practice it, just try it, have it, just show up, take the thing you've already prepared. It just takes you 15 minutes. That's kind of stuff that I think it doesn't have to feel like this big onerous thing. I need to prepare, write this whole new thing. I need to get the crew. I have to schedule it. So that, and I know that the digital studio kind of facilitates that as well, that you can just kind of show up with your stuff and they'll help you record it. Yeah.
Something in that really hits me. It's like you had to spend time preparing for class anyway.
Right.
Like if this stuff, and like WordPress is there. I mean, that's easy enough to type into, like in the same way you were going to prepare for class, except now it's everyone in the world can see it. Like if we can just harness the time you would have spent preparing for class anyway, if the technology can be to that simple enough a level.
Class for me is like rehearsal for doing the videos, basically, at this point.
It's like a comedian who does the club. So.
But I like the comedian because I think that one of the fears is that if I mess up in a class, 15 students see it or 20 students see it and they forgot by about 45 minutes later. When I put something out there on the web, it's going to stay there. Even if I erase it, it's going to stay there. And lots and lots and lots of people are going to see it. And I think that with that comes a fear, which is an understandable fear. It's a fear I think we've overcome because we think it's important to do these sorts of things. And I actually find doing it live, oddly enough, is less anxiety-inducing than actually just looking into a camera. So I do webinars. And, there's people out there and then it gets recorded. But it gives it a feel of like, okay, if I mess up, at least it feels like a class as opposed to looking at a camera.
Do you think that our current president will make people not worry about things like that, since he doesn't seem to worry about messing up ever?
I don't know if we want that as a model.
I actually think he'll make people worry more about that because the structures are kind of sacrificial, right? And it just the mobs that can emerge over the littlest things. I think we're actually headed for more worry about that.
For Mary Beth, as a librarian, I guess this is where I'm sort of coming from when I think about this. What do you see as sort of maybe the reasonable limits of which subjects or classes can be adapted to be fully OER or reasonably OER? I'm asking because at my campus, I'm helping the professors across several departments change classes from traditional publishing models to OER. And so people like the math department and some sciences are either finding very good resources already existing or adapting things with, not too much trouble. Whereas with literature or writing or English, where you depend on established texts that are still in copyright, how far can you really take an OER, sort of the pursuit of OER, when you rely on source texts that are 20, 30 years old and won't be out of copyright, till all of us are dead. So where does that leave us? Like, how far can OER really go?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. It certainly doesn't meet every need that we have at this point, and I don't know how far down the future we can expect that it will. But at least we have the kind of structure set up at the library where we do have our subject specialist librarians and the art librarian and the history librarian, and they can spend their, attention on the sources that may be out there for that subject area. It's not like up to any one person in the library to have to kind of maneuver that whole situation, and to keep abreast also of maybe how it's being used elsewhere, where the creative things are coming along out in other institutions and stuff. But I guess library resources, again, they fall into that category. They're not something that can be remixed and reused, but they can be seen as a piece of a larger picture,
Yeah, the thing is, you asked about disciplines, and so there's the differences that you described. That's why the writing program has to use licensed library resources, but at least then it's free for the students. So there's that effort. But there are also very different cultures in different disciplines. And so, I'm sure, the medical field has a curriculum they have to teach, and it's, life or death for all of us that this gets across. And they've been more advanced in, in open educational modules than others. And so it's a cultural, that was one of the first, right? There's popular sites that work. So, and then scientists are used to publishing open access in different again, Biomed is kind of a leader there because of the National Library of Medicine providing sources. So it's part of it is what are the resources that the discipline must teach, and part of it is the disciplinary culture. And that makes some disciplines have more things available than others, I think. So,
from my experience, I would say it's probably a lot about managing people's expectations, but finding ways to do a little bit of both. Like, I think probably the promise of it is a little more than what's going to be likely, and so. That's what we found, like looking for ways to have some electronic stuff, but mix it with some physical stuff.
more? Not, that's impossible.
So, aside from bringing down the cost of materials, does this lower the barrier of entry so that some upstart university could just start an upstart university with WordPress and
I think why MIT has put their classes up online is because they're confident that people will actually go to MIT to get a degree. And that you can have an upstart university and people can be educated. And I think Khan Academy is actually a very good example of that. But you can't get a Khan Academy degree. And so as long as there's institutions which control the degree granting programs, and those institutions are based on reputation and history and so on and so forth, I think we're safe for a bit.
Although I kind of suspect you want to bring it down, Dan.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is enough free stuff out there to make many a program work, but I agree, you have to build the culture around that. And I think that'll take a long time for that stuff to develop in ways that people feel there's a legitimacy to those programs.
What are some of the benefits and incentives for faculty to, undergo this transformation? Like what we've talked about how it, benefits the students or costs and all these other things. What is in it for the faculty to make this kind of change, and how has it allowed you to how has your syllabus changed over the years because you've been doing this sort of work?
I'll just speak. I am teaching a course this semester in the graduate department of Media Culture and Communications, and it was supposed to be about the New Deal and art and propaganda under the New Deal. The first day we showed up, it was right after the Trump election, and we realized that that was impossible. And so we completely redid the syllabus as a group, and it continually gets revised every single week with new things put in, texts, images, and so on and so forth, as a collective project. That would have been impossible 15 years ago. And so for me, it allows a creativity and a spontaneity and a collaboration, which I wouldn't have been allowed under different circumstances.
For me, I guess personally, it's something that I just really enjoy doing. I think that having the distance between people who are learning and making stuff with the content and me authoring the content get shorter and shorter is really an enjoyable, inspiring experience. And so, so on the one hand, reaching a wider audience beyond the students that I have at NYU is kind of a side benefit. And then also for me, I feel, a great deal of comfort in like sort of teaching. It reduces my anxiety in certain ways of have all these additional resources that are prepared and open and easy for the students to access. And the way that the material just gets refined over time in collaboration with the students is really, I would say a big benefit as a teacher, and that I think others would enjoy as well.
Okay, yes, all right. This is great, keep talking. I know, we're supposed to go to a reception, but
Yeah.
I'd rather hear a question.
Out of curiosity, in terms of the OERs, do they implement or incorporate universal design framework? Because I know that there are so many diverse learners, not just at NYU, but around the world, actually. So how much of those components, reaching out for those who learn differently? Because I think that's equity, here's what we're talking about too in education.
Yeah, I can speak to one aspect of this. This is something that's been a major issue in open source computer programming education, and recently in the last year, Processing Foundation, we did an accounting of like all of our different tools and realizing how many of them are not accessible by certain standards and aren't compliant. So in terms of this is something that in a new project we're working on, which is a web-based editor where people can learn to type code in the browser. We're able to really, it's a new project, start with that being a primary key feature of the project. In terms of the video stuff that I've been making, this is something that I would love feedback and help with. The one thing that I've been trying to do is, and using the sort of community of people watching, is get things captioned and translated into other languages, which has been certainly interesting to see how that can kind of be done in a crowdsourced type way. But I think it's in terms of the broad spectrum of OER resources, I don't have an answer for that, but I'm glad you asked that question. It's super important.
Just briefly, I don't think I did it well, but one of the driving impetuses of the Open Utopia project was to say that a book is only one way to access the material, and reading a book is only one way to access the material, and sound is just as important, visual is just as important, having a creative input is just as important. And I think, again, the tools at our disposal, once the content has been freed up, allows for that if there's an impetus to actually meet other people's learning styles and learning needs in a way that a book just can't, really.
Okay, now you'll have to take your questions to the reception one at a time. Oh, Ben, I'm sorry.
Just a very simple thing. That was another reason to have those redundancies built into the descriptions of the text, so that a screen reader would revisit that text twice, and the student would get a better sense of what's actually there.
Yeah, the point is, it's more opportunity to try. That doesn't mean they're all designed well, but it opens up the potential for that, and a little more consciousness raising every time people talk about it will help increase what's out there. Okay, now, thank you, Ben, for the over the research. Let's thank this.